Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to DWF Live. My name is Riley Goldsmith, and I'm the Director of Programs and Operations with Gord Downie and Chani Wenjack Fund. As we gather today throughout Canada or Turtle Island, we'd like to remind you that we are situated on Indigenous lands, both treaty and unceded lands. This land is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. And as a country, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land of which we live and work. Today, Chani Wenjack would have turned 68 years old. Chani was an Anishinaabe boy from Martin Falls First Nation. And in 1963, at the age of 9, he was sent to the Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School in Kenora, Ontario. 3 years later, he ran away trying to reunite with his family 600 kilometers away. He joined the spirit world a week after he fled. His body was found on the railway tracks. Chani's death sparked the first inquest into the treatment of Indigenous children at residential schools, and we continue to honor his story and the stories of the thousands of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children who attended these schools. Thank you to all of you who would join us in honoring Chani by learning about the history and the ongoing impact of residential schools, and for taking reconciliation. Inspired by Chani's story and Gord's call to build a better Canada, the Gord Downie and Chani Wenjack Fund aims to build cultural understanding and to create a path toward reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. Our goal is to improve the lives of Indigenous people by building awareness, education, and connections between all people in Canada. We'd like to thank our friends at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants for hosting these sessions for us, and we hope that you will continue to learn more on your own path toward reconciliation. So now I'll pass it over to Joe, who will be your host for today's session.
Awesome. Riley, thank you so much for the acknowledgement. And yeah, it's a really important day today. So it's great to be connecting with so many classrooms today and to have them join in this learning with us.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Riley. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. As mentioned, my name is Joe Grabowski from Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, and I will be your host for today. Just a few little things I want to point out just before we get started. I want to share the link here to the Downie Wenjack Fund website. So if you'd like to learn more about the work that they do, the story, about what it takes to become a legacy classroom or school, if you aren't one already, you can visit the website to find more information. And of course, a huge shout out to all the legacy classrooms and schools who are joining us live today. We have a great speaker who is joining us today. I'm so excited. We have Kahentawaks Tiewishaw joining us today. She is a visual artist whose practice includes 3D modeling, illustration, game making, and sculpture. She's also the Skins Workshops Associate Director with the Aboriginal Territories in Cyberspace and the Initiative for Indigenous Futures. She's deeply interested in video games as a vehicle for Indigenous culture and experience, as well as their capacity to facilitate the healing of intergenerational trauma. So I'm going to bring her in live with us right now. All right, Kahentawaks, so great to see you today. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me, and thank you for that introduction.
Of course. Well, look, we have a great group of classrooms joining us from across North America today. Many of them are already saying hi in the YouTube chat. I can see groups in Edmonton, Newfoundland, grade 7s hanging out in Toronto. I've got someone here says they're joining from China, another group in Guelph. So it's great to have a big community with us today. We're excited to learn a little bit more about your story and the work that you're doing. And then we'll rock a little Q&A action. So I'll let you take over for a bit.
Awesome. Sounds good. I'll share my screen with you guys so you can see my presentation. All righty. So hopefully you guys can see that. So, hello, everyone. So my name is Kahentawaks Tiewishaw. What you may or may not know about me already is that I'm Bear Clan from Kanien'kehá. I studied in cinema video communications at Dawson College, from which I graduated quite a while ago. Then I went on to study Computation Arts at Concordia University. Both of those schools are in Montreal. And Kanehsatake is a territory that's about an hour north of Montreal. Some of you might have heard of it already because it's the site of where the Oka crisis happened. So that's where I'm from. And yeah, as Joe said, I'm a multidisciplinary artist. And you might have noticed my presentation, the name of it is Indigenous Video Games. how I learned to mix games with language and culture. So I felt that I couldn't really talk about that without talking about what some of my favorite video games are. So I bet there are quite a few of you who are into video games. So these are ones that I've been playing both in my childhood right through to adulthood. So my favorites are the Mass Effect trilogy. I played a lot of Final Fantasy X and X-2, even though some people say that's not the best one, but I thoroughly disagree. Jak and Daxter, classic. Minecraft. I played the Arcana for pretty much like all of 2020 and 2021. And Kingdom Hearts. So yeah, if you like some of those games, you're pretty cool. So I'll move into talking a little bit about my art and the things that I make, because I wanted to give you like a broad picture of all the different kinds of things that I do. Because even though I do make video games primarily, I do a whole bunch of other stuff because, you know, I can't focus on any one thing. So here are some of my illustrations. These actually came from a game that I made for a class while I was studying at Concordia. The game was about this girl who was returning to Earth after being gone with the rest of humanity because the planet had become unlivable due to like climate change and pollution and all that crappy stuff that everyone already knows about. So she was returning to the planet with her sister, and her sister was this super powerful AI. And they were like one of many pairs who were sent back to Earth to try and like, quote unquote, terraform, to like make it habitable for people to live on the planet Earth once again. So those are just some of my drawings from that game. I like to use drawings in my games as like cutscenes, so I can get around animating, because animating is a lot of work. And if you know somebody who does animation or is interested in animation, those are very brave people. So this is an illustration I made back in 2020. My friend Anastasia and I were commissioned by the Cult Montreal magazine to make something for their cover. And I actually have the magazine right here. Ta-da! So yeah, that we were commissioned to make that piece because we had previously done a Black Lives Matter mural in the streets of Montreal. It was like this big group artist painting activity where each of us were assigned a letter and we could paint whatever we wanted inside of that letter. So my friend Anastasia and I did the C over there. And working on that was super meaningful for both of us because Anastasia, is a Black woman, I'm an Indigenous woman, and we thought it was just such a unique opportunity to collaborate because, you know, our people have kind of experienced similar things along parallel lines in the past and also in the present. Here is some of my sculpture work. So some of you might recognize Ezio from Assassin's Creed. I made that with one or two other people while I was working at Megablocks because I worked there for 4 years between college and university because I kind of wanted to take a break from school. I was just tired of writing and I wanted to see what it was like to make a little money. So while I was working there, I made all kinds of like brick sculptures that would go off to places like New York Comic-Con or San Diego Comic-Con. And Ezio actually ended up in the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, and I think he's still there today. These last two images on the right, they were sculptures that I made for a class at Concordia. So I made the model, the sculpture, in a 3D software called Blender first, and then I put the model into another software that kind of sliced it into all these different layers, and then I laser cut those layers out of wood and stacked them all up and glued them and sanded the rough edges off. So that's kind of how I made those last two sculptures. And I'm not sure if you can make out the tree image. There's like these 4 dark circles at the base of it. If you touched one or more of those little panels, the canopy of the tree would light up. So it was a little bit of an interactive sculpture. So that was very fun to work on. A little bit challenging because I'm definitely not like a circuitry or techie person at all, but thankfully I had somebody to help me out with that. Here are some more of the sculptures I made while I was working for Mega Bloks. I don't know if anyone's ever played the Skylanders game, but I had to do a whole bunch of sculptures for that game when it came out because Mega Bloks had the license for it at the time. I was pretty sick of looking at them by the end of it. We also had the Monster High license. So what you're seeing on the right is a life-size brick sculpture of Frankie Stein, I think her name is. And the big sort of bed-looking thing next to her was a Mega Bloks toy. So it was like a life-size version of a buildable set that we had. So I've done all kinds of weird things in my career. So here is some of my early 3D work from my time at studying Computation Arts at Concordia. Yeah, the girl with the red hair, that was like my final project for the very first 3D course that I took. I thought it was super amazing at the time when I made it, but now I kind of look at it and go, I could do better, which is good. It's a natural progression. You always look back as an artist on your old stuff and go, ugh. If there's anyone who has like a sketchbook and people are asking to look at your sketchbook, it's that same feeling I get when I have to show these images. But I still think it's important to show because, you know, everybody starts somewhere. The image on the right with the kind of girl with pink hair, I actually 3D printed that at some point. So I sculpted and made that character for a game that I had to do for work when I started working as the, 3D modeler for the skins people. I can talk more about that later. I have a whole slide for it. But yeah, I 3D printed her out and it looked so cool. I was so happy with it. Here's some of my more advanced 3D stuff. So kind of towards the end of my time at Concordia, it was like my last 3D course before graduating. And this big sort of machine thing that you see on the left is actually made from all of these little tiny bits and pieces you see on the right. So first I had to sculpt all of these tiny little things. It was part of an assignment. So the first half of the assignment was make all of these little bits. And then the second half of the assignment was, okay, now combine them to make some type of cool looking machinery and, you know, put a really nice texture on it and take a good picture of it. And that's how it turned out. So you can kind of see the difference from like where I started to like where I ended up. So I'm very happy with the progression. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about my games and how I got started making games. So when I was a child, you know, in high school, I was very much playing a ton of video games. And it was to the point where I was like playing games more often than I was hanging out with my friends, which might be a problem, but whatever, that's what I did. So when I was studying in high school in Kanien'kehá, because even though I'm from Kanehsatake, I went to high school on the reserve that's south of Montreal called Kanien'kehá. And while I was in the 11th grade, AbTeC and IF offered the very first Skins video game workshop to my class. And that was kind of my introduction to like, oh my God, Indigenous people in video games? What? I had like never even considered that before because, you know, I had never played any games with Indigenous people in them or even, well, there were games that mentioned Indigenous people, but usually we weren't talked about in a very positive light. So there's that. So when I went into these workshops, I had only ever done like pencil and paper drawings. I had like dabbled maybe in MS Paint before and doing like weird little Naruto fan art drawings like that. But that was about all the experience I had with digital art at the time. I was only drawing and maybe painting and that was it. But then these workshops came along and they introduced me to things like 3D modeling and animation and level design. And yeah, that really got me to thinking like maybe there's a way for me to like engage with my language and culture while also, you know, being kind of involved with video games, which I was very passionate about. And it was pretty great because I went from being a participant in one of the very first Skins video games workshops back in 2008 to being the Skins workshop associate director. So now I'm kind of in charge of running Skins workshops, organizing them, and kind of passing on my digital knowledge to other Indigenous youth who may want to take up, you know, making games. Because we have lots of stories to tell, and they're important. So the first game that I made was for a class, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. It's called Kahentawaks, which translates to teachings. It's a game that's playable in English and in Kanien'kehá, which is the Mohawk language. And it tells a story about the importance of taking care of Mother Earth, because, you know, if we take care of her, she'll take care of us. This was the very, very first game that I had ever made. It was a huge challenge because, you know, I always kind of plot out my timeline for making these things. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I have all the time in the world to make this. But then when it actually comes time to make it, suddenly, oh, my God, this is way more work than I anticipated. But I got through it. And I actually submitted it to be exhibited at the 2019 Imaginative Film and Media Arts Festival. And it was very well received. And it was actually responsible for work that I got later on in 2020 because they had seen this game and thought, oh, that could be used in an educational context. Because, excuse me, the game, as I said, I'm pretty sure it's playable in English and in Kanien'kehá. And it teaches like the story, you know, about taking care of Mother Earth. While also teaching the vocabulary and how to identify local flora and fauna in Concordia territory. So yeah, that was the first game I ever made. The second game, if you could call it that, it was probably more of a VR experience, is called Negi Rodiana'u, which translates to legacy. And this was made in Unity, and it was for the Oculus Quest. So you would like put the little headset on and you'd be able to pick up items in the room. And as you picked up individual items in this room that I made, like a little sound bite would trigger. And all of these different items told the story of an Indigenous girl living in a foster home. So yeah, there was this big narrative that you had to uncover by looking through the room, finding some of her stuff, you know, and just interacting with it and learning about what her life was like in that experience. So this was for my advanced 3D course, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. So this was one of the last projects I did for school. Right as the pandemic was kicking off, actually, this was the project I was working on. So there was all kinds of stress around it, but I got through it. So this is a game I made in 2021 called Phonics Onage. It was actually for Indian Way School, which is a Mohawk immersion school in Kahnawake, because they saw the first game that I made, Kahentawaks, and they thought, wow, this could definitely be used in an educational context. And it turns out they had been looking for somebody to make things kind of similar to that for a while. So yeah, they commissioned me to make a little game like this, and now we've got a pretty good working relationship, and we fully expect to be able to make more games for them in the future. Awesome. And yeah, this is a personal project that I'm working on right now. The tentative title is called Black Fawn. It's a visual novel, and it deals with the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people. It's going to be a little bit mature content, but I think it's an important issue to talk about. And yeah, all of these images are me just trying to figure out what my main character is going to look like, because, you know, I'm very indecisive. I always have so many ideas, and one of the hardest parts of my process is trying to narrow down all the ideas, be it like story ideas or character ideas. There's just so much, and like it's really a problem of how do I get it on paper before I forget. I feel like I'm just bursting all the time. So yeah. Oh, fun fact about this one is I actually got the idea for this game or character while I was teaching a skins workshop. So yeah, exciting. And that's pretty much it, the end of my presentation. So I guess we can go on to some Q&A.
All right, excellent. Well, Kahentawaks, thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's such a varied artistic career that you do have, and I think of my artistic talent, and it's definitely maybe lies in one area, maybe a little bit of sketch, but you've definitely branched out into a lot of different areas, and it looks like you're doing great work from game making to sculpting, and those Lego creations. I can imagine the effort that goes into putting one of those together.
Oh yeah, it was nuts. Like we didn't even use the computer software to help us making those. It was all free-handed. So wow. that was crazy. If you made a mistake, you had to like break the bricks off with a hammer and chisel to fix it.
Oh wow. Okay, well, very cool. That's pretty darn impressive. So you're right. Let's jump into a little Q&A action. There's anyone who's joining us live via YouTube, any classroom, feel free, or anybody to use the chat sidebar, send us in some questions. Let's start bringing in some of those live classrooms now, though, and let's get some of their questions. So let's see here. Let's go. We've got an art class hanging out with us, some grade 9s with Miss Lim in Ottawa. So I'm going to bring them in first and see if they have a question for us to get things started. So here we go.
Awesome.
Hey, everyone. How you doing?
Good. I think they're good. We have a question for you, and
Yes.
that is, where do you, some of the students want to know if they can find on Oculus, and also like where you sell your games.
Oh, so this is actually like a little bit of a, not problem, but something I probably have to work on, is that I don't have my games up anywhere publicly at the moment. Well, that's not true. Kanien'kehá, which is the teachings game, the very first one that I made in 2019, you can search that up on like the Play Store on your phone, and it's available for free to download. But the VR experience is not up, unfortunately, because I think it's like actually really hard to upload things to the Oculus Store, whatever it is. So yeah, I do actually plan on being able to, put it out there in the future. I'm just like currently overwhelmed with projects, so I don't really have time to like backtrack and work on things that I finished. But it is a plan in the future.
All right. I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes I feel like my to-do list gets bigger by the end of the week. Imagine
yeah, it
yours
really
is probably
does.
the same way sometimes.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Miss Barton's crew is hanging out with us in Toronto. Let me bring them in here now. There we go. How are we doing, Miss Barton?
We're great. We've got a question for you.
Have you made any other like kinds of books, or are you just starting on your first one?
For books, like visual novels, I suppose. No, the one that I'm working on, Black Fawn, right now is the first visual novel I've ever attempted to create. And yeah, it's kind of been in the making since early 2020, because it's like a bit of a passion project for me. So I'm being a little bit of a perfectionist about it. I just want it to be like amazing and exactly what I pictured in my head. So yes, there's that. I hope I answered your question.
All right. Well, just another example of kind of pushing yourself and trying new things. And I think that's important for students too, is, whether it's science or art or, any other subject you might be taking that interests you, is to try different things and see where it takes you. And and it sounds like you're definitely on some adventures with the new graphic novel.
Yes.
All right. Miss Julian's crew is hanging out with us. How are you doing, Miss Julian?
Hi, I'm by myself here, but I have a lot of people joining me virtually from around our LNB community. So I have one question. I have a bunch of questions, but we'll start with one from a grade 5 student named Ava. And she wants to know if you draw on paper to start your ideas, if you go directly on the computer, what do the tools look like that you're using to do this design?
So I, most of the time, start out, like for a lot of my career, I started out on paper and pencil. That's like probably still where I feel the most comfortable. And then when I have the sketch drawn out, then I'll like take a picture of it and bring it into Photoshop and start working on the line art. But recently I have been trying to do my sketch and rough work in Photoshop, just to save myself having to take the picture or the scan or whatever. But yeah, I think paper and pencil is always going to be where I'm the most comfortable.
All right, I'm going to grab a question off of YouTube here. We've got Mr. Harrogot's class joining us. They're a 4th and 5th grade class. And first they say, super impressive. The work's very inspiring. And then they're wondering if there are some Indigenous artists that have inspired you.
Oh my gosh, yes. Now, obviously, because somebody's asked me the question, I'm blanking on all the names, but I can tell you that in terms of like people that have inspired me for games, it's really the people that I have worked with, that I've had around me personally. So I'm just going to drop some names if people know them or not. There's Megan Byrne, who is another Indigenous game maker. I think she's working on a game called Purity and Decay. And then there's Maze Longboat, who used to actually have my position as Skins Workshop Associate Director, and he made a game called Terra Nova that went into the Imaginative Film and Media Arts Festival at the same time that my game Garihonyanitsara did. And it actually won Best New Media for him. So like it was very inspiring to just be in the midst of all those people while that was happening. So yeah, I'm just inspired by my peers is the short answer.
All right, we've got some 6th graders from Sudbury joining us with Mr. Amaro. I'm going to bring him in now. How are we doing today, sir?
Hi there, we're doing good. And yeah, same thing. All my students are tuning in virtually. So we have quite a few questions too. I'll ask one though from a student in my class. His name's Carter. And it's kind of a 2-part question. What piqued your interest, or what got you started, or what made you want to get started with developing and designing video games? And then also, what program did you use? Maybe before or now?
I love this question. So what got me into thinking about video game development was 100% the Skins workshop that I participated in when I was in 11th grade in high school. Because before that, I was kind of thinking I was going to be a very traditional artist, like trying to sell paintings or all that kind of stuff. But I never thought making games was something that I could do. It didn't seem accessible. I thought it was something that you would have to study for your whole life, and it was very hard to do, and it had to be perfect, and it had to be AAA quality, or it wasn't worth the effort. And that workshop was really what opened my eyes to like, no man, you can make your games to be whatever you want. It's not important that it's like super polished or even done in 3D with all this crazy rendering. All the games that I've made actually have been made with pretty much free software. So the 3D software that I use is Blender, which is free and open source. Like you could go on the internet right now and download it, and you could find a bajillion tutorials on YouTube. And I'll tell you a little secret that in my advanced course at Concordia, all we had assigned to us were YouTube tutorials to teach us how to do these things. So tip. And what was the other thing? Oh yeah, Unity. Unity is the other program that I use. And that's like a game engine software, which is free until you make a game and you start making like a lot of money. And then once you reach a certain threshold of making money with their platform, then they start to charge you. But I haven't hit that threshold yet, so it's still free for me. Yeah.
All right, very cool. Let's dip back here into YouTube and grab another question here. We've got, let's see here. Miss Russell's class is joining us from Walnut Grove. And they're wondering about any advice you might give to students who want to see themselves better reflected in popular arts and media.
So my advice to you is, especially if you're like a creative in any way, and by that I mean you could be an artist, you could be a writer, you could be a filmmaker, just like get out there and tell your stories, because your experiences are valuable, and you got to put them out there, because nobody is going to tell your stories for you. And if they did, they probably wouldn't tell them in a way that was accurate or maybe not even respectful. So the best thing to do if you want to see yourself reflected in popular media is to like go out there and make it yourself, because nobody is going to do it for you.
All right. I like that advice. That's good advice. And, I think we're seeing more and more that you don't have to wait, until you're an adult to find your voice and start building things, doing the things that get you excited and the things that you love to do.
Yeah.
All right. Mr. Holden's crew is joining us from Waterloo. I think he's got some grade 5 and 6s with them. How are we doing today?
Hi, we're doing well, thanks. Good to hear from your stories and everything like that as well. We have a whole bunch of artists here. And the one question that I sort of have, speaking for my class, is how do you know when you're finished a work of art or a video game or something like that? How do you know when to say, I'm done, I stop, I'm done? And when do you know when to sort of dig a little bit more and to give it another coat of paint or another polish or something like that?
Cool. So I'll be like 100% honest in that I'm still kind of figuring that out myself, because I definitely am the kind of person that if I can work on something forever, I will. I'll like tweak it. Or even if I say, okay, I need to fix this one small thing or this one little aspect of my game, and then that's it. By the time I finished tweaking that last thing, I'll have found something else, and I could keep going forever like that. But at some point, you know, you've got to stop trying to cram all of your ideas into one project, because the more you try and squeeze in there, the more diluted your message is going to get. So if things are starting to get a little obscure, then maybe it's a good sign that, okay, we're done with this project because I'm trying to do too much, and then I need to do something else to get the rest of these ideas out of my head.
All right. Always good to be honest. And yeah, I can definitely see how if the time is there, maybe that's why deadlines are a little bit better, because you know, it's just done and submitted. Whereas without that deadline, then it could be hard to find that point where you want to kind of let it go.
Exactly.
All right. Mr. Palandra's crew is joining us, some grade 7s virtually from Toronto. How are we doing, Mr. Palandra?
Very good. How are you?
Good.
So for my class, they just wanted to know which game or book you're most proud of out of all everything you've created.
So that is probably going to be a tie between the VR game Negiro Dienao and Garihunyanitsa. But between the two, I would say the more challenging one to do with, and kind of by extension, the one that I'm the most proud of, is Garihunyanitsa, which might not be, you know, what you're anticipating or expecting, because the 3D thing was easier than the 2D thing. But yes, that's actually what happened, because 2D, I don't know, I just found it so much more challenging to break back into drawing, because while I was studying in university, I wasn't practicing my drawing or illustration as much, because I was trying to learn all of these new skills for like digital art. And so my drawing had kind of taken a bit of a backseat position. And that game was me trying to remember, how do I even, you know, draw people? How do I draw anything? And let alone put it into like a game. So I think Garihunyanitsa, my very first game, is still the one that I'm the most proud of.
All right. Excellent. Well, we still have time for questions. We visited our virtual class, or sorry, our camera classrooms, as well as some questions from YouTube. So if you're in your classroom and you have some more questions, your teacher, if you just shoot me a message in the private chat, I'll know to come back and visit your group again. Or if your class is there, you could send a student up to the camera, and that'll kind of be my key to come and visit, my visual cue to come visit your classroom again. But I'm going to grab one more question here from YouTube. So this one I think is definitely from a student, and they have a question about a specific game. Before I ask the question, I should make sure you play. Do you play Mass Effect?
Yes, I'm currently playing my way through the remastered trilogy right now.
All right, so Kiana wants to know, what is your favorite species on there in the game?
All right, so it's definitely a tie between Turians and Drell, because both of my love interests in that game are Garrus and Thane, and that's why.
Okay, fair enough. That was one of the examples that she had there. Turians is one of the examples that she listed in her question. Very cool. All right, I see a few comments here from teachers, so let's visit a few of them. So Miss Julian, looks like they have another question there. I'm going to bring her back in.
Hi, we have lots more questions, but we'll stick with this one. We're curious about your personal history and had some questions about, are you old enough to remember the Oka crisis? And then that led to some questions about what language did you grow up speaking, and did you grow up speaking Mohawk with your family, and how did you learn that, and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, so I actually wasn't born when the Oka crisis happened, but my parents met at the 1-year commemorative powwow of the conclusion of the Oka crisis. So when the Oka crisis finished, 1 year passed, and they decided to mark the occasion with a powwow. And my mom was introduced to my dad, and the rest is history. Here I am. I wish I had grown up speaking Mohawk. I did actually attend Mohawk immersion school for all of my elementary education when I was younger, but I didn't. Neither of my parents spoke Mohawk. My grandparents did, but they had a lot of the stigma of ooh, we don't want to speak our language because of residential schools and intergenerational trauma. So they didn't really teach my mom or my dad at all. Well, my mom's parents, my mom's parents spoke Mohawk, my dad's did not. So yeah, the result was that my siblings and I, none of us really spoke the language at home, unfortunately. But that's kind of what inspired me to make Mohawk language games now, was because I would have loved to have the resources to practice learning the language at home. And I probably would have been fluent if I had been able to speak it in my home. But yeah, I definitely plan on learning, kind of hopefully through making these games. So yeah.
All right, another great question from our groups. And I can see someone standing front and center in Miss Barkin's class, so I better bring them in here. There we go.
Hello. I'd like some advice on writing because I personally am a writer.
Yeah. So the best piece of advice I could give you for writing is to just do it in little bursts, because I used to write where it was like I would sit down and try and write for maybe 5 hours, and then I wouldn't touch it for a week or two because I thought, wow, I spent such a long time writing. I don't really feel like sitting at my desk for another 6 hours today when I did that yesterday. But if you get into a healthy habit of writing maybe for like 1 hour a day, just in little bursts, you'll find it's easier to sit back down and keep going. But yeah, at the end of the day, I guess it's what really works for you.
Okay.
All right, great question. Okay, let me check my comment section here. There we go. Mr. Romero's class, looks like they have another question. Let's bring them in there.
Hi there. This is a pretty quick question, but you built, I think you showed us 2 different kind of sculptures made out of Lego. And my class was wondering, like, how long did it take for you to build those, or the team maybe?
Yes. So the time really depended on the size of the sculpture. But I would say the average for something that was life size, so like 6 foot, was maybe 3 to 4 months with a team of 2 to 3 people. Yeah, and there would be times where it would be maybe a week before the convention and there was still like a quarter of the build left to do. So we would have to go in on the weekend and just like, speed build and hope for the best. I remember times where we were like very close to the deadline, where the palette was ready to like have the thing put on and shipped and sent off, and we were still like frantically putting bricks on the statue, and yeah, like right up until it was being shipped. It was stressful, but they were cool, and I'm glad I had the experience.
Yeah, they looked awesome. I didn't think it would take that long. That's a very long time.
Yeah, well, it wasn't. It was because we didn't have computer software that made or generated the build, because it was Mega Bloks, who's like a Montreal company, and we like prided ourselves on the fact that we didn't use computers to help us design the thing. It was all free-handed. But in the end, maybe it is smarter and faster if you're trying to produce these things very quickly to use a computer program.
All right, awesome. I see our grade 9 art class. Looks like someone is there and ready to go.
I have a question. Which coding language do you use for video games?
I actually don't do any of the coding. That is my best friend Frederick Kowalczyk's job. He's a developer. So my part in the game making process is I do the writing and I do the art. And then my friend Fred does all of the coding. I did take some coding courses when I was at Concordia, but it was really hard for me. So maybe I figured that was not my realm. I tried it, didn't like it, and I know enough about it to be able to like speak to people about it, but that's where it ends, unfortunately.
All right. So if we do have another question, we haven't been in Mrs. Hoole's class yet. Give me a wave if you have another question. Mr. Palandra, if you have another one, turn your camera on for me. In the meantime, I'm going to grab another question here from YouTube. I think this is Miss Babbitts, and she would like to know, where do your ideas come from? Do you find they come from certain places, things you see, or where are those ideas coming from?
It's really all over the place. Like my main inspiration for Garihunyan Itsura was my childhood, because I was very much surrounded by my traditions, because I went to Mohawk immersion school and they were teaching us everything about the language and about our traditional practices and like traditional crafts. And my school was in the middle of like the the pine forest, which is like right next to the site where the Oka crisis happened. So I was very steeped in all of that cultural and experiential knowledge. So being surrounded by nature and all of this talk of Indigenous stuff, I was like, wow, how do I inject all this into a game? And that's kind of where Kanien'kehá came from. But in terms of like, I guess what inspires me these days is like a lot of Indigenous issues. So that's definitely like, you know, my Black Fawn game is inspired by the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people. And pretty much any issue or topic that I care about a lot will probably end up having a game made about it. So yeah, there's that.
All right. And so EP is joining us via the chat and wants to know, you mentioned, I think, visual story a few times. Is that pretty similar to a graphic novel? Are the terms kind of interchangeable?
I would say so, yeah. But I say that as somebody who's played maybe 3 or 4 visual novels in my life, and a lot of them have been dating sims. So yeah, I think the terms are interchangeable, because for me, a visual novel is pretty much just a game where like it's like an interactive storybook, pretty much. That's kind of, and the book is a choose your own adventure, but you know, you're playing it on your phone or on your computer.
All right, I think we can squeeze in 1 or 2 more questions. I see someone front and center in Miss Barkin's class again, so let's bring them in.
Hi, so I was wondering, you were talking about something called the Skins Workshop. Is that like a thing we can still like sign up for a class to do?
Yeah, so depends on the age group really, because I think that right now we are offering for our workshops to people who are in high school and above. But that doesn't mean we can't necessarily do skins workshops for younger groups. It would just have to be a little bit different. So yeah, you can definitely have your teacher email me and I could see what we could do.
All right, very cool. And Miss Julian, I know you mentioned there were lots of questions, so maybe we'll see if there's one more from your crew.
They were mostly covered sort of the same sort of questions. We had questions about inspiration, so you really answered that, but it was a little bit more specific, asking about authors or artists or real life stories. So I don't know if there's any books that you've read lately that really inspire you. I know that there's like a big Indigenous wave in Canadian literature right now. Have you been able to dig into that, or are you playing games? I'm the librarian asking that question.
I am actually reading this book right now by Amber Dean. It's called Remembering Vancouver's Disappeared Women, Settler Colonialism, and the Difficulty of Inheritance. So I'm reading that as kind of like, you know, background research for my game Black Fawn, because I really want to engage with that topic in a respectful way and not, you know, feed into any potentially harmful stereotypes. So I'm reading that as, you know, a bit of a guide to how to talk about, you know, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people.
I think that's really cool. And I think that it's really interesting that your work, a lot of it's like nonfiction art, which is really cool. Like everyone who could participate in your games is really learning something from what you're putting out there. It's really, really cool.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to start off with obviously a huge thanks to the Gordownie and Channy Wenjack Fund for organizing these events. We always have a blast hosting them here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. This started off with events around Secret Path Week in October, where we do a week of events connecting with Indigenous artists and scientists and leaders from across Canada. And we just have so much fun doing it that every month now with DWF Live, we're connecting with Indigenous artists and leaders and scientists, and to bring them live front and center into classrooms. So I'll post a link shortly where you can check out some more of the events that we do have coming up. I want to thank our classrooms who tuned in via YouTube today. What a great group. Thank you for all the questions that you've been sending in and all the comments. I know we have groups tuning in live via Facebook as well. I want to do a big shout out to our camera classrooms. I'll pop a couple of them up in case they just want to wave here. There they are. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. All right. And then, of course, biggest thanks of all to our speaker. Kahentawaks, thank you so much for just a great event. Oops, we left one classroom there. There we go. And, you know, taking us into your story, taking us into your inspiration, and all the different ways that you're kind of bringing, stories to life through so many different mediums. So absolute blast. And we definitely look forward to seeing what comes next.
Awesome. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. And I was super happy to be here, and I had a lot of fun. And I got asked a lot of interesting questions. You know, the younger participants, they always ask the more interesting questions. When I give talks to like university students, nobody asks me anything.
I think it's a little bit of shyness sets in as you kind of get to higher levels sometimes. Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Well, I want to share this link before we sign off, exploringbytheseat.com, and under special events, you can find all the DWF events that we do have coming up, and we'll be announcing some more for March and onward shortly. So again, thank you so much to everybody who joined us live today. Don't forget to visit the Downey Wenjack site as well to learn more about the program, about the artists, the ambassador artists, and of course, to become a legacy classroom yourself. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.